Committee meeting of the School District of Waukesha Board of Education. I call the meeting to order. I'd like to start by wishing everyone who served a very happy Veterans Day. Blessed to have had your service and the sacrifices that you made defending our great country, so thank you. All right, we'll start with general business. First, Julie, can you please verify that the meeting has been properly posted?
Yes, it has.
Thank you very much. All right, now we come to the point where we have an opportunity for citizens to speak. Do we have any speakers tonight?
We do not.
Okay. With that then, we can move on to our first action item, which is the approval of minutes. Do I have any discussion or motions to approve? Mrs. White.
I make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Moved by Mrs. White to approve the minutes.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Harlan. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, passes 4-0. I should note that Mr. Borowski is excused for tonight's meeting, so we have 4 committee meeting members tonight. All right, with that, our next item is we have a guest with us tonight. Mr. Siebert, would you like to introduce him? And
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to, Mr. Watt. So we are fortunate to have with us here tonight State Senator Julian Bradley. And welcome to the desk, if you would, Senator. We're grateful for you joining us. And we moved our government relations portion of the meeting up to the front. Usually we do that on the back end, but with having the senator with us, we thought we would address those items first. We have 2 items that the senator will help us with tonight and answer any questions that you have. The first being artificial intelligence, and he led a study committee over the last summer that he can tell us about. And artificial intelligence is obviously something we've talked about in this committee. We have an artificial intelligence policy. We reference artificial intelligence in a number of different policies. Yet I don't know that any of us completely know exactly where it's going, right? And so I think it's interesting to hear from the senator the work that his committee has done. And then secondly, we'll have an opportunity when that discussion is done to talk about the 25-27 state biennial budget process. Obviously, as a state senator, he's a part of that process, and that will be up and coming in terms of he can give us kind of a high-level overview of what that will look like going forward. And the other thing I would just want to say before he even gets started is we're very grateful for the relationship that we have with Senator Bradley. He has a new district, and he was with us in the past, then he wasn't with us, and now he's back. And so we're grateful to work with him. We're grateful to work with Brett, and the relationships that we talk about and how we try to build those. This is a great example of what that means. So thank you for being here very much. All right, so Mr. Watt, is there anything you wanted to say before we get started?
no, other than to thank Senator Bradley for coming and sharing his thoughts with us on AI and sharing anything he's able to about the upcoming legislative session and budget, education related. Just grateful to have you here. Thank you for coming.
There we go. Well, thank you all so much, and thank you for having me, and I appreciate the relationship that we've been able to develop, even as it's been intermittent, as you mentioned. So I'll start off on AI. It's a very exciting time for artificial intelligence. This is where I could make the Terminator joke and say, especially if you're the AI. But I don't want to scare people. We've been having a lot of fun with that on our committee. So this summer and fall, I was privileged to chair a joint legislative study committee on the regulation of artificial intelligence. And we came into effect so the governor had a task force, the speaker had a task force, and then the joint legislative committee, which is members of both houses in the legislature and members from the community. So business leaders, community members, concerned community members, et cetera, came together to lend their expertise to talk about how AI is impacting their everyday lives, their businesses, and what the future of AI looks like. From the very beginning, from the onset of this committee, I made it very clear to members and to the public at large that I didn't think action and activity from the committee in the form of creating legislation was going to be the outcome. This technology is so new that we don't want to be in a position where we add guardrails or barriers and slow it down or stop it as things are still being developed. Now, there are things that we are already aware of where AI can be used for nefarious means, and we were lucky enough to address two of those things this past year, this past session. One of which had to do, you guys probably recall that we just had an election a week ago, and we had a bill that was passed and signed into law that said that any usage of artificial intelligence in campaign materials had to be disclosed. That's a big deal, especially when we're dealing with misinformation and how quickly it is to spread that information. So we were able to pass that bill. It was signed into law, and it was in effect for this year's campaign. The other piece had to do with child pornography, where we expanded the felony. It's already illegal, obviously, to hold, view, etc., anything that has to do with child pornography. But there was some gray area, and there were questions about, well, what if it's artificial intelligence created? And so we shored that up, we clearly defined it, and we made sure that that was also listed as illegal with strict penalties as well. And so those two things have been kind of, if you will, universally accepted low-hanging fruit, areas that we know that artificial intelligence can be impactful and used in a negative way, and we were able to take action on those already. My committee's role was to look at the next steps and to begin the research, right? So we are a study committee, and a big part of that is studying. So looking at the research, examining what's happening in states that have already rushed into action, states like Colorado and Connecticut and California. And if you've done any research on any of those state laws, there was a lot of pushback on those, and people were saying, hey, these are a little too restrictive. And in fact, there's already changes and amendments happening in all of those states. So we wanted to make sure that Wisconsin doesn't follow suit. We don't want to rush in, but we also want to make sure that we are providing consumer protection. And so as our committee's finishing up, we're actually not finished yet, so I don't have a finalized report for you or anything I can give you to say, here's the finished product. We will finish up next month. But where we are today, I feel very confident and comfortable with the work of the committee because we've been thoughtful. We've created a database now and a place for future legislators, including in this next session, to go and be able to say, oh, this is a reference point. These are things that have been discussed. This is why there hasn't been legislative action. Or here's an area where we think there may need to be legislative action. If this, then this. Whereas right now, legislatively, there just really isn't anything. There's a report from the governor's task force, a report from the speaker's task force, but a full database led by our, we call them Leg Counsel, our legislative council attorneys who really do the drafting of our legislation and are a great resource for us. Until this committee, the depth of the detail that we have did not exist. So we took that pretty seriously as a committee, and it was just fascinating hearing from so many business leaders, from healthcare to law enforcement to education, talking about how artificial intelligence impacts their industry and what they're hoping to do with it. Not everybody is created equal, so not everybody's had an opportunity to get out to the forefront and see how AI can help them. And so they're just looking for opportunities to do that. We want to make sure we afford them with those opportunities, but also protecting the consumer is a very big deal. So as we head into our final meeting in December, I would believe that consumer protection will continue to be at the absolute forefront. I don't anticipate a large package of legislation related to AI coming out. I believe our final report will likely support policies and pull together what I would categorize as suggestions and advisory opinions of what the legislature should look out for and what the government should do. Again, if this, then this. Because right now, at this point, we're just so early in the technology, we really don't want to put any restraints on it that would keep the growth from helping the businesses that are desperately needing employees and that are trying to use AI to backfill some of that. And we don't want to put any constraints or any restraints on the healthcare industry that's trying to use it to come up with information, with education, with all the various industries that are just really scratching the surface. So that's where we are. Like I said, we have our final meeting coming up in December. It's a pretty exciting time, and I'm looking forward to how that meeting comes together. And as we work on the final report, it's been truly an eye-opening experience. I can tell everybody here and anybody watching, AI is not going to take over right now. We're doing our best to make sure that we're not going to have any Terminator situations, and that's part of the guardrails, right? We want to make sure that people feel comfortable with AI, and we want to make sure people know when AI is being utilized. We don't want it to be in the background, especially when it's consumer facing. We don't want it to be so much in the background that we don't really think about it. We want you to know if what you're interacting with is artificial intelligence, or if what you're seeing is artificial intelligence, because I think that's part of, quite frankly, getting used to it and then learning to trust it or not, and making sure there's checks and balances. I can tell you I asked every person that came in that talked about how they use AI before they publish anything, who verifies it? Is somebody verifying it? And right now, the marketplace is very strict on that. Everybody that answered our questions said that they have a human that takes a look at anything that goes in. That's great. So I don't feel the need to rush to making that a law at this point, but we're going to talk about it. We're going to continue to talk about it, because at some point, if that's not the case, or if there are actors that don't do that, that could be a concern. So I will stop there and happily answer any questions that I can.
Thank you, Senator Bradley. Anyone have any questions? Mr. Brooks.
Yeah, thank you for being here, Senator Bradley. So you mentioned that one of the stakeholder groups that were a part of the study committee included folks who come from the world of education.
Yep.
And one of the reasons why I brought this conversation around artificial intelligence as it relates to our schools up a few months ago was we've seen situations in other states where students are creating auto or AI-generated images, often sexually explicit images of peers, of staff members. I think there was a case out in, I want to say, Maryland, where someone created an AI voice message of a administrator allegedly saying, making anti-Semitic or racist remarks, and it came out several months later that it was fake, but by that point, this individual's reputation is severely damaged. Yeah. I guess, what were some of those conversations around AI as it pertains to the world of education that came up in your committee, especially kind of in the realm of some of this cyberbullying stuff? Because I think we're already seeing, as technology continues to evolve, cyberbullying is a big deal. Like it's very different from when I was even in school. And as we have a number of students who, their online profile is just as important as their in-person, their real life profile sometimes, and being able to push back on some of that and some ways that other states are handling that either positively or negatively.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And that came up quite a bit, actually. Cyberbullying, online bullying, and utilizing AI to do so is one of the things that you just instantly found universal agreement on within our committee, that is something that we absolutely need to take a look at. But as we had further conversations, it sounds as though the laws that we have on the books today cover the usage of AI. Now, what's interesting is in talking to our law enforcement friends, they are getting better and better at quickly identifying the difference between AI and human. And that's where the unfortunate thing is it takes some time, but they're getting better and faster at it. And the faster and better they are, the quicker they can address those concerns. So I think there's going to be some opportunities to try to put some more resources into law enforcement as they have to track down some of these things so that they can absolutely respond appropriately and enforce the laws that we have on the books. But that came up quite a bit, and it's so fascinating how everything kind of connects together. Depending on the industry, there's always a way that, so you wouldn't think of education and law enforcement having a crisscross, but AI does that. It crosses right into that, and it crosses into the general workforce, manufacturing, for example, crosses into healthcare. It's quite a fascinating journey to be on with artificial intelligence.
Other questions for Senator Bradley on AI? Mr. Harlan?
Yeah, so again, thank you. I know it's a difficult topic to investigate as it is so new, so I appreciate that. Are there, within your conversations, obviously it has been a wide scope, is there anything that was brought up that you felt was, should be shared with groups like ours that we should investigate further?
It's a good question. I'll share something that I think should be shared. I don't know how much more investigation needs to be done, but I think it's so important for people to know that the goal of utilizing AI is not to replace people. It's to help people. At least as I've spoken to every single group that's come in, every employer that's come in, their goals are to utilize AI to allow humans to work on other parts of the business. And there still have to be people to oversee and talk to the AI. The AI can learn, but somebody still has to tell it what to do. And that's been, to Ms. Brooks' question, that's been a big part of the education piece, especially at the tech colleges right now. And it's really going to get down into the high schools, and soon enough it's going to be district-wide. Where we start teaching kids how to interact with and talk to AI and teach them how to ask AI to produce what it is they're looking for. So if there's anything that I can pass on and share, it's that at this point there's nothing to be afraid of. Of course, I did say at this point very intentionally because, if the Great War breaks out, but I don't think it will. I think we're in a good place. AI still needs to be told what to do. And it'll be incumbent upon us and each of you in this room as leaders within the school district to ensure that the kids right here are ready to go into that world, because in 10, 15, and 20 years, AI is going to be very, very heavily influential in the workforce in every category. And so having a population that's ready, willing, and easily able to communicate with AI and instructed to do the position and do the tasks that it needs, that the companies are looking for, is going to be critical and crucial.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions on AI for Senator Bradley? Mrs. White?
Again, thank you for coming to give your insights. Yeah, I was so impressed to see that your involvement in the committee, through the state and the research that you've done. Can you give some examples of the restrictive legislation that's been put in place in Colorado and California and Connecticut that you referenced earlier? Some of the things that we can learn what not to do.
Sure. So they're legislative. So I would caution you as a school board from instituting sweeping bans. Most of these things are happening at state levels. So there's really not much that we've studied that's drilled down to a local level. But a sweeping ban on, and I don't even know if that's anything that you would do here, but a sweeping ban on technology and the utilization. Obviously, you can and should regulate whether students are writing papers using artificial intelligence. That's not something that we would take a look at at the state level. But the language, and I'm sorry I don't have the other states' information on me, but I can provide you the report. We do have a paper that was written up and produced for the committee that I'd be happy to share with this committee as well. It breaks down, it does a great job breaking down Colorado, Connecticut, and California, especially. California's was going through while we were actually meeting. They were still fighting it out in the state of California, and I think a big portion of it ended up getting vetoed, if I remember correctly, because it was just too restrictive. So companies weren't able to operate, and it was pushing them out from being able to do business or recruit, et cetera. So those are things that really wouldn't be handled at this level, but I'm happy to share the report with you. They're also available on our Legislative Council Study Committee website, but we can happily just email that over to you.
I think my biggest concern would be academic honesty.
Sure.
And how do we try to make sure that the kids are taking advantage of the tools of AI, but not just taking, an advantage
Abusing.
that would be inappropriate?
Yeah, absolutely. There wasn't a lot of that came up. We were at a more broad scope instead of drilling down into the specifics. This did come up. I think this came up in maybe our second, or maybe it was our first meeting. Our first meeting, because it was at Waukesha Technical College. We started talking about this particular topic, and there is, I can't remember the name of the resource. There's a resource that teachers are using to run papers through that can identify artificial intelligence to ensure that nobody's cheating, if you will, in producing their product. So that topic did come up, but that is going to be, and that will continue to be regulated at a local level as opposed to a statewide level.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, any other questions on AI? So we had as a second item, just state of Wisconsin, 25 to 27 biennial budget update. So obviously, you've just come through elections. You're probably just starting to get a look at what the legislative makeup is. And congratulations, by the way, on your
Thank you.
victory last Tuesday. Is there anything that you can share with us, ideas that maybe floating around or initiatives that your colleagues may be looking at relative to the budget and education specifically?
The budget in general, yes. Education specifically, not quite. So I saw it today. Dr. Underly's report came out. She's asking for, I think, a $4 billion increase. I think that's what I read today, but I haven't had a chance to go through all of that yet. So the agencies are still in the process of creating their budgets, and then they'll submit them to the governor. The governor will submit a budget address, his budget and his budget address sometime in early next year. So that's the stage that we're all in right now. As everybody's very aware, we're sitting on a pretty large surplus. Most of the people I've talked to want to get it out of Madison. We want to get it back to the people. Beyond that, we have not had in-depth conversations yet because we're just unaware of what the totality of what the budget is going to look like from the governor's perspective. As the executive, he gets to craft his own budget and send it over, and then our finance committee hasn't even been formed yet. So we've not put together anybody to work on the budget yet, but that'll be coming very soon. And once that does, we'll start going through the process.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions for Senator Bradley, budget related?
I can't answer a lot of questions about it, but I can take feedback, and that's why I brought my staff as well. So if there is anything, we're happy to.
So that probably is a great segue into one of my issues that I'm hoping the legislature will give more attention to. So we just had a finance committee meeting before this one, and we're starting our process now of our own budgeting for the next school year. And so that would be the, 25, 26 budget, right? So one of the things that came up is what's state aid going to look like next year, right? Just, do we have any sort of estimate? And it led to a discussion around the number of school districts in the state of Wisconsin, just this past November, but even in this fiscal year, that have passed varying sizes of both operational referendums and capital borrowing referendums, totaling over $3 billion. I think I heard there were 190 referendum questions. I don't know if that was just on Tuesday or this entire calendar year, but it's an enormous number. And last year, we got from the Legislative Fiscal Bureau a report, and this came on the heels of Milwaukee's passage of their very large referendum, that because of the passage of that referendum, that their increase in expense, which is driven by their, being able to spend more, would have an impact on the state aid that goes to all the other remaining districts in the state. And I think, if I remember correctly, the estimate was $2 million a year, I believe, that Milwaukee will cost the school district of Waukesha in state aid. heaven knows how much more Waukesha will be impacted by all of these other referendums that are being passed in other communities. I mean, Madison was over 600 million that passed. Eau Claire, I think, was 175 million. I don't remember what McWanago's was, if I just want to cherry pick some of them that I know were in the larger size. One of the things that I personally find unfair to school districts like Waukesha, the school district of Waukesha will be reducing property taxes, or the levy at least, 2.5% this year. Our average over 3 years, what is our average? Is it around 3% decrease?
Yeah, and then over 10, we're essentially flat.
Flat. We are likely to be debt-free in 2 years. While we as a district are, planning, spending wisely, we got done with, I forget how much in capital improvement projects this past year where we didn't raise a dime through referendum to complete, where other districts are actually running referendums to do a lot of that work. So, trying to get through my long speech and get to the point I'm getting to. One of the things I don't understand in the school finance space is why it is that a school district, and let's use Milwaukee because they're the ones that we actually know the hard numbers on the impact to Waukesha, is allowed to continue to get additional state aid based on their spending rather than having it plateau at where their revenue limit would be had they never passed a referendum. They are incentivized to pass referendums. The voters in the school, in MPS, are essentially taxing everybody else in the state at some level. And they're taxing the school district of Waukesha $2 million a year if the estimates provided by the Legislative Fiscal Bureau are correct. I'm wondering if I might request that you take this issue back to your colleagues in the Senate and see if we can start addressing this inequity that's being driven by this rash of spending. As far as I'm concerned, if the residents of the Madison School District want to raise their own property taxes to cover a $600 million referendum, how much that is capital or operating, I'm not sure. Not up to me in Waukesha to tell them they shouldn't. However, the citizens of the school district of Waukesha shouldn't have to be suffering a reduction in the state aid, which is their tax money that's being lost and will have to be made up through an increase in our levy. So wondering if I don't know how familiar you are with some of these issues, if you'd like to speak to them at all, or if you're just would be willing to take that back with you to Madison. But from my perspective, and I feel strongly that the citizens of the school district of Waukesha would support that.
Yeah, so this was raised to me in a meeting outside of this school district as well, because it's frustrating. It's very frustrating for the surrounding communities. It's on our list of something to take to Madison and address with my colleagues as soon as we get back together so that we can start talking about this. Because loopholes like this, as you mentioned, they're incentivizing referendums to occur, and they're penalizing districts like Waukesha, which aren't going to referendum. So that's the opposite of what I believe the intent was. So we're going to have a conversation about what we can do about it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions, budget-related, education-related, for Senator Bradley? All right, see none. Once again, Senator Bradley, thank you so much for coming. Appreciated the presentation on AI and looking forward to working with you and your staff going forward.
Thanks for having me. I look forward to coming back in the future.
Great,
Thank you all.
All right, moving on the agenda. We are at item E, policy discussion, information. The first one, we have some technical corrections. Before I turn it over to Dr. Siebert to discuss those technical corrections, I wanted to address this matter from a higher level because this came up last policy meeting, and I just want to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page. So During the course of the discussion, your presentation of the technical corrections last month, there was a request to bring 3 of those policies to the floor for discussion. We talked about, well, maybe we should bring them back next month. Had some time to do some research and thought on this, and I just want to kind of set the table for how I would expect to handle technical corrections and any questions that people have about the policies that are getting technical corrections going forward. So I went back and looked at our policies, and we do have policy 0131.1, bylaws and policies. There is a section near the end, technical corrections, and it talks about the superintendent's role in this regard. And I don't want to read the whole paragraph, but it says, the superintendent is authorized to review and make technical corrections to policies that have already been adopted through normal rulemaking procedures. I think the operative sentence is the last one in the policy that says the superintendent shall inform the board of any such changes no later than the next regular board meeting. So, in essence, what this is saying is, when technical corrections are brought to the committee, they are nothing more than a sharing of information by the administration. It's not an action item for this committee to act on. Certainly, when they're presented, if we have questions around the technical corrections themselves, certainly discussion around that would be germane. But I think in hindsight, going away from anything related to the technical corrections under that agenda item on that, or under a technical corrections agenda would be inappropriate. So, looking then at another policy, and I know this is going to address items 2 and 3 on here, and this may kind of provide some foundation for the direction we're going to go with this kind of thing in the future. From my perspective, if there are specific policies that a committee member or a board member may want to have, some section of it taken a look at, perhaps revised, the appropriate way to get those to a committee is to request them to be added under the agenda item for other business, which is recommendations for future meetings. Because the way we operate is we have policies directed to the committees that it would make the most sense for that committee, their expertise, that oversight, to review them. It seems to me the appropriate thing to do in those cases is for the chair of that committee to get that policy and make it, or to get that recommendation and decide with the discretion they have as a chair whether or not they are going to agendize it for the future. So we can talk about the ones that were brought up specifically last month after we get through Dr. Siebert's technical corrections for this month. But I just kind of wanted to set that baseline for tonight's meeting because we have more technical corrections, and I don't want us to kind of fall into that same situation as last month. So I don't know if anyone has any questions on that. If not, we can move on to Dr. Siebert presenting this month's technical corrections. All right, Dr. Siebert?
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Watt. So this month's technical corrections are relatively minimal. So we changed the name of policy 0144.5 from board member behavior and code of conduct to board member behavior, communications, and code of conduct last month. And so the technical correction is just adjusting where that policy is referenced in 3 additional policies: 1210, board superintendent relationship; 0143.1, public expression of board members; and one of our other newer policies, 7544, social media. And all the technical correction is just updating the title of the policy and adding that new communications word into the policy.
Dr. Siebert. Anyone have any questions on that? Comments, any discussion? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Dr. Siebert.
You bet.
So next item, so this goes now to kind of what I was speaking of before. There were three policies that a member of this committee, Mrs. Voigt, had requested be brought back for further discussion. First one is policy 221, special observance days. I think, in my opinion, just having it on as a discussion item without there being any identification of a proposed change wouldn't be an appropriate way to bring it to the committee. So I would ask Mrs. Voigt if you'd be open to, when we get to, because, so here's the other thing I'll say. I look at that one, special observance days, I would expect that to be a policy that this committee would be the ones to review and then decide if there are changes, if we're going to move them onto the board. To ask for it to be added as a recommendation for future meetings with an identification of what it is that you're seeking to review and possibly change. And if you're not prepared to do that this evening, just get it to me, and I will consider it for a future agenda item. Are you comfortable with that approach?
Just basically to tell you what I'd like to see considered at this point, or just wait until the end of the meeting?
I would say let's just wait and have it come up under recommendations for future meetings.
Okay.
And because I think then the next one in the agenda, three, policies 3216 and 4216, which deal with staff dress and appearance, I would expect those to be handled by the HR committee. And what I would recommend is reaching out to the chair, Mr. Borowski, with a similar request for him to consider agendizing whatever your recommended changes or concerns are for a future HR meeting.
Okay.
Are you comfortable with that approach for those? If so, then we can probably move on unless anyone else has any questions or concerns. You good? Okay. All right, so that will take us to F, policy discussions and possible action. We have back this month 0167.3, public comment at board meetings. This was here for discussion last month. There were some suggested changes that we asked Dr. Siebert to look at and include and then bring it back this month. And so with that, Dr. Siebert, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wad. So I thought the committee had a great discussion on this policy last month. And so we tried to work in some of the discussion topics, all of them actually, that you had. So the first one being the recommended change of the name of the policy to public comment and decorum at board meetings. We then changed the first subheading that had said public comment section of the board meeting to public comment at board meetings. We had a discussion on making those terms match because we also have public decorum at board meetings later. So there's congruency in the language. So that, we thought that was a suggestion. That was Mr. Borowski's suggestion, and that made good sense. We then have everything else the same, where we just moved pieces like we had last month. And then we had the discussion around rights reserved to the presiding officer and what the presiding officer may do. And we had some discussion around number one and who should be listed in number one. And at one point, it was the board and the superintendent. Then we talked about cabinet members. And then as Mr. Wad and Julie and I met going through this agenda, we recommended the change to, instead of cabinet members and the superintendent, district and school administration and the superintendent. Because we think all of us are in leadership positions, and so to the extent that people have comments in regards to those of us in leadership positions, that would be difficult to shut down and probably should be allowable. Is that fair, Mr. Wad?
Yes.
Some more discussion?
Yes.
Thank you. And I think then just our school district Waukesha edits at the end. So it really is just, this is one that Dr. Piasek wanted us to revisit. I think through the discussion that you had, the public decorum part is a nice addition. I think separating it out from the public comment section is good. And then those rights reserved to the presiding officer apply to either the public comment section and/or the decorum, and that those follow then at the end. So certainly willing to answer any questions, or if you think there's something we didn't cover that we talked about, we're certainly willing to try that too.
All right, thank you, Dr. Siebert. All right, any discussion on this policy, the wording change that we made under item 1, rights reserved for presiding officer? So I guess the only thing that I'll say is just, at various times over the, past couple of months, you might have a discussion with another board member and they might mention something about public comments and how we need to review the policy, and maybe we should look at doing this and look at doing that. I'm comfortable passing this as is and providing an opportunity for the full board to perhaps suggest other changes. There may be, all of us serve on committees where public comments, all of us on the full board, all of us have experienced different things as board members related to public comment. So I think this provides a good framework for a deeper discussion, should the board want to have it. And I would support passage of this so that we can get that discussion to the board this coming Wednesday if there's an appetite to have it. All right, if there's no discussion, I guess I would entertain a motion for adoption as presented.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Brooks,
I second it.
seconded by Mrs. Voigt. Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, passes 4-0. Thank you very much. So that now takes us to other business, recommendations for future meetings. Yes, Mrs. White.
One of the things that I would, I guess, want to bring up again that I had talked about earlier, at our student services meeting last week, we discussed again the annual review of the different drills and, hold, secure, et cetera, kind of activities that need to happen. And I complimented Betty on taking the discussion last time to Representative Scott Allen to look if there would be any interest in doing a drill bill per se, to take a look at the Wisconsin Statute 11807 health and safety requirements. Our discussion was all about how it's important for kids to really feel comfortable with how to handle different kinds of drills, and that it becomes rote, that when there's a call for a lockdown, you just know what to do and you can deal with that. I guess in light of the fact that that very day there was the situation in Kenosha that has led to a lot of discussion and potentially a felony charge against the teenager that was trying to get in with, potentially guns in his possession. My concern is that there's so much emphasis on the fire drill, and I really think that they need to be looking at the other drills to let the students become more comfortable with that. So the topic that we had originally talked about, Betty said that there was definitely support from Representative Allen to keep going with it, but it was going to take a lot of work. And I guess I'd like to see us continue to encourage that direction, to look at the whole drill bill concept, from what kinds of drills are we expecting the kids to feel safe in our schools?
Okay, so just so I'm clear on the request, you're requesting that we agendize
that we'd continue, that we continue support for what, Betty had started to do with Representative Allen. There was feedback that the fire marshals weren't keen on the idea, but I got the impression from her that that Scott Allen wasn't ready to abandon it. And I'd like to see us continue to, voice our support if he's willing to do that. Because at our last meeting, it sounded like we were kind of giving up on it. And it sounds like, I'd like to see us continuing to support if he's willing to go forward with more legislative initiatives.
Okay, so just so I'm clear on what the ask is for future meetings.
To look at recommendations to the statute 11807, health and safety requirements, and the drills that are mandated at the state level.
All right, we'll take a look at that. Thank you, Mrs. White. Anything else for future meetings? All right, hearing none. That brings us to the end of the agenda. Our next Policy and Government Relations Committee meeting will be on December 9th at either 6:45 PM or immediately following the Facilities and Finance Committee. Should that run past 6:45. Thank you all, and have a wonderful night.